WSDQ Dunlap, WEPG South Pittsburgh, The Copperhead, WSDT Saudi Daisy, Chattanooga.
The viewpoints expressed on LibertyWorks Radio Network are not necessarily those of the network, its affiliates, or sponsors. This is LibertyWorks Radio Network. Now live from coast to coast and around the globe. More real talk, the kind you want, on LibertyWorks Radio Network.
And good afternoon to all of you LibertyWorks radio listeners out there. This is the hour for the Truth Attack Hour. And on Fridays, on other days of the week, you have different hosts. But on Fridays, I'm your host. My name's Becraft. I'm sitting here in my office in Huntsville, Alabama. And I have my co-host on, Shaun O'Connor. And both of us extend to you a warm invitation to listen to this program. Over the next couple of weeks, maybe the next couple of months, we're going to be addressing this annual ritual that the American people go through, which is tax season. And we're going to be educating people or giving you information that has a relationship to that topic. But before we get into today's topic, I need to bring on my co-host. Shaun, how are things out there in California?
Well, things are pretty good. We had some rain yesterday, which we always need, of course. And today it's sunny and bright and about 62 and a lot of contrails in the air.
And the contrails mean what? They're engineering the weather?
Well, so they say. So they say.
Hey, Shaun, I've been on this program for years, ever since Tommy Cryer, Tommy,
absolutely,
got this started maybe 10 years ago. Truth Attack Hour on this network. And Tommy's no longer with us, but, people have kind of come and gone during this Truth Attack Hour over the years. You're new to this 5 o'clock, 3 o'clock out on the Pacific Coast time bracket, and I think our listeners need to know a little something about Shaun O'Connor. Now, you and I, we go back to the early 80s, and we've been around the block a time or two, but I want to ask you this question. What got Shaun O'Connor interested in these patriotic issues, particularly the money issue and the tax issue?
Well, I'll tell you what. I was sitting at work one day, and a friend came up to me, and he threw a book down, and he said, "You know what? You ought to read it." So I took a look at this book, had a nice yellow cover on it, and it said, "How Anyone Can Stop Paying Income Taxes" by Erwin Schiff. So I looked at him, and I said, "You want me to read that?" And he said, "Yep." And I said, "Have you read it?" And he said, "Yep." And I said, "When are you going to jail?" And he laughed. And he said, "Give it a read. Just give it a read." So I sat down and I read it. And it grabbed me right away. And then I thought, I remember the admonition I was given as a kid. When things sound too good to be true, they probably are. So as compelled as I was about it, what I did for the first time in my life, I took that book and I headed down to a law library at the local university. And I started digging through the Internal Revenue Code. And the Internal Revenue Code was footnoted. And through those footnotes, I started running around over court cases. So I was curious, and I started pulling the court cases. And the more I read the court cases, the more sections of the code came up, the more I became involved in researching the code. And I became so involved with it, I couldn't hardly stay away from the library. And then I picked up another book by Erwin called The Biggest Con. And I read that, and I thought, the government, this so-called government of ours, has literally declared war on us. And after that, I read a couple more of his books, and I started doing research. When I wasn't working, I was doing research, which my wife did not appreciate very much, but I was so compelled to do it, I couldn't stop. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized just exactly what was going on with this government, not just only with the income tax, but the money issue and so much more that I had no choice. I had to become involved.
Well, kind of summarize your involvement. How many decades ago was that?
That was back to the early 1980s.
And generally describe what you have done since that time.
Well, since that time, after I did all this research, I stopped filing returns and was eventually criminally charged and acquitted. And after that, I decided that I couldn't continue in corporate America and become involved in this at the same time. So I left corporate America behind, and I became involved in this. Actually came out to California because I was associated with some folks out here. Became involved with Free Enterprise Society as a director and executive officer, and started giving seminars and becoming involved in assisting people with their income tax situations. And I was there about 23 years, and eventually I moved on from that and set up an organization called Free Enterprise Society Services, of which I'm the director today, and still doing the same thing, helping people, researching this, trying to educate people, which is one of the reasons I like being on this show with you, Larry.
Well, we've got a problem, though, Shaun. And before you came on, and incidentally, Jane, wants us to be, a couple of minutes ahead of time. But I was talking to Jane, and she made this comment to me that and I agree with this comment. It seems like over the last couple of years, particularly since cell phones have been around, it seems like there has been something's happened to the American people. Now, with your vast experience in dealing with this movement, I would like for you to describe, for the benefit of our listeners, what things were like, say, like in the 80s and 90s, maybe in the early 2000s. And now.
Well, okay. In the 80s and 90s and 2000s, let's start with the 80s. People actually from all over the country would gather together at various conventions. Free Enterprise Society at that time had a convention once a year running for many, many years, where hundreds of people would come to various spots in California, wherever we held our conventions. Hundreds of people would come, and we would have guest speakers from all over the country that worked on the income tax research, and not just the income tax, but money issue, health issues, various other issues. And hundreds of people would get together, come and share their experiences, rub shoulders, get to know each other, create friendships, go back home, and those friendships lasted. And this would continue on and on when people would get together and talk about these things face to face and discuss them and formulate different ways to get the government's attention to get an understanding from the government that, hey, we the people run this outfit, this country, and you guys are doing some real on-towards things here, and, you've got to start fixing it. You have to start backing up here, especially in regard to the income tax. Anyway, it was very, very hands-on, and people were meeting and getting together. Not only that, but we conducted seminars throughout the state of California and Nevada in the spring and in the fall, and we would have great turnouts at these seminars that we would have. They'd be 3 times a week running for about 2 months. And we would meet people, and people would meet us. And it was a very, very good personal experience. That lasted right up until about the time the Internet became real popular and cell phones came into the picture.
So true. Now, the FES conventions back in the 80s and the 90s, my personal impression is, I consider those to be some of the most enjoyable events I have ever attended. They were fantastic. It was great to go to an FES convention. We don't have anything like that now. We don't have the camaraderie that used to exist. I guess we can call it the good old days now. Something has happened here in America. The government has not changed. We've still got the same problems. Maybe our side is, on the ascendancy now with Trump in place. But still, the American people as organized and as vocal as they were in the past. What is it going to take to change things?
Well, first off, one of our problems is, as I see it, is a generational problem. We have a couple of new generations coming in since the 80s that don't appear to be paying as much attention to what's going on. And then we have Trump, and Trump, I think, factors in here real big, because I think that a lot of the people in this country think now that Donald Trump is a president, it's going to be the land of milk and honey again, which it's not. Trump can fix things, but he can't fix everything. It takes the people to really move our elected government officials. The government officials won't move themselves unless they're prodded by the people. To get everybody back together, I think what people have to start doing is, I mean, the internet is great for educational purposes. It's great for gaining knowledge and doing legal research and even communicating to some extent, and so are cell phones. But what has happened from what I've seen is that this is what the people have pretty much relegated themselves to, is emails, cell phones, the internet. And when we started continuing conventions in the I'd say 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 area, more and more the people dropped off. They just weren't coming. I guess there was a need the need to come wasn't there anymore because the internet was there. But in my opinion, the internet cannot replace those conventions, and did not. And so now we have some real impersonal ways of communicating with people, and ways of distributing information, and a lot of the information is bad, but a lot of people don't understand that because they read something, they don't go any further, and they believe that they found an answer to this entire situation. But again, as nice as the internet and cell phones and everything is, I think it has hurt what we've been trying to achieve because of the lack of personal contact.
So what is it? We're going to be doing this show. Hey, I want to tell our listeners, Shaun and I are going to be doing this every Friday, at least every Friday that I'm not occupied. And if I've got something else to do, like I'm out of town or something like that, Shaun's going to be doing it. But we plan on every Friday afternoon coming on this program to educate whoever going to come and listen to us. And we're broadcast over the internet. We're trying to create an interest in patriotic issues and trying to galvanize people into action. Now, not only are we doing this on Friday afternoons, Shaun, tell our listeners what we do, what we've gotten into the habit of doing on Wednesday evenings.
Well, Wednesday evenings, we have been doing, I believe now for about 2 years, we've been conducting webinars on the internet. And we send out invitations to, at least I do, and I know Larry and Joe do too, to everyone that we know, letting them know the time and giving them a hyperlink or a telephone number to these webinars that we conduct. And the webinars, we deal with a series of issues, not just income tax. Income tax mainly, yes, but as Larry was saying, there's a lot of political issues and a lot of other issues that are going on in this country, too, that, as far as I'm concerned, are eventually going to lead to the destruction of this constitutional republic, which we also discuss. And we have a variety of different listeners. We have a variety of audience. We take questions and answers. Sometimes we even open up the webinar and say, we're not going to hit or broach a subject and dance on it for the next hour. What we're going to do is open it for conversation and questions, and away we go. We have a freewheeling webinar, which is not only a lot of fun, but I think it's very interesting not only for the people that participate in the webinar, but for those that have their own ideas that they want to throw out for other listeners. I think it's a great vehicle. You can attend it either by video and audio or by either, or you can attend it by telephone. And I think it's been a great success so far, and I look forward to the audience growing more and more.
Well, we're going to be having our first break coming up here in just a minute, but I want to tell our listeners, if you want to listen in on, or be a participant on our Wednesday night calls, go over to Joe Master's website. Now, which website is it? Which website does Joe have where people can pick up the weekly link to participate in one of these Zoom conferences?
It's Joe's website. It's
all right. Well, hey, Shaun, the music's coming on. Let us know. We have hit our first break. Hey, folks, after a few minutes, we'll be back. Stay tuned. We're going to be educating you this year. And welcome back to the Truth Attack Hour. This is our second segment. Oh, this is the first broadcast Friday for this program during 2020, the year 2020. Now, right before the break, I asked Shaun, what is the website? If you don't get a link to our Zoom, and we have, people have to get a special link to participate in a particular Wednesday night meeting, you got to have that link to get over there to the exact spot on Zoom where this meeting will be held. And if you do not have access to, or we don't send you an email giving you the link, you can get it off of Joe's website. Now, right before the break, as we were talking about, well, what website? I couldn't remember the website. Well, one of our listeners, Mike Wilburn, he sent me the link. Now, if you want to participate in our Wednesday night Zoom conferences, where we're talking about, although, it's a little bit different, a radio program and a video program over the Internet, they're kind of two different things. You can see a lot more if you're doing something on Zoom rather than a radio program. There's no way we can show you videos and documents here on a radio program. But if you don't have a link from us, if you're not on our list, go over to Joe's website. It's www.agentfortruth.com. And when you get to agentfortruth.com, look for a link to another page, the live radio show, and you can click on that link off of the Agent for Truth page, and the information for each particular Wednesday night meeting will be posted there, compliments of Joe Bannister, who
right.
is
and Larry,
also
it should be on the first page, Larry. According to what I'm looking at right now, the live show link should be on the first page when you bring it up.
All right. Well, what we're doing, here's what I want to tell our listeners of this program. Shaun and I are doing both these Wednesday night meetings and these Friday afternoon programs. And we're going to be trying to, particularly all the way up until we're getting ready to get into, I guess we're into it now. All this hoopla about, you got to get all your tax information together. You got to start doing these things. And hundreds of billions of dollars will be sent to governments over the next 3 months. And Shaun and I asked this question, why is that done? And our position is that, people need to, if you're going to if you're going to spend, 25, 30, maybe 35% of what you make every year just paying government's income taxes, you ought to know the reason why you're doing so. You need to do something more than, hey, everybody's acting like lemmings. The media says you got to do this, and so everybody dutifully does it. Well, for the price that people are paying, I think it's well worth an investment in time to investigate it, and that's what Shaun and I, as well as Joe on Wednesday nights, that's what Shaun and I are going to be doing over the next couple of months. Now, having said that, let's get into some meat. And Shaun and I were discussing right before the program today, well, what are we going to talk about this afternoon? Well, I want to tell our listeners what we are going to be talking about. Now, this movement has been subjected to a lot of bad information. I encounter a lot of bad information all the time. Let me give you an example. There's, y'all may not have heard of this lady, but I have. I call her Fake Judge Anna. Here over the last couple of months, I've seen her spouting off. She's this, lady that pretends to be a judge. She's from Alaska. And she's sitting there talking about nationals. And a lot of these gurus that come up with these stories that they invent, if they were true, they could point to something other than their mere personal opinion. But too often these people that are making some type of an argument can't point you in anything that confirms what they're talking about. And that applies to this fake Judge Anna Von Reitz. And she's been talking about national. Now, this is what I'm talking about being people being misled by some of these, people like Anna Von Reitz. She's been making this argument about nationals. Now, that has been around for a while. I can remember 10 years ago, people were getting into this national issue. I'm a national.
Yep.
Well, if you dig back into it, that is the exact thing you should not be claiming. And people think that they're getting into, they've got some invented, these arguments about a national. These arguments are all completely invented. Now, I want to tell our listeners the reason why this is invented. And I've got information posted over on my website. And I will be talking about how to get to my website during the, as we're going to go through the program today. But, historically, a national, that word didn't get started until the early 20s. And it came up in reference to in the international community. Uncle Sam, our federal government, basically what is our federal government? Our Uncle Sam, our federal government is our domestic international power. But that's a real good description of Uncle Sam. We delegated to Uncle Sam, all of the states delegated, they all had a power to deal with the rest of the world, deal with the international community. All the states got together, we delegated that to Uncle Sam. So the primary responsibility and duty, as we're seeing right now, Uncle Sam's his duty to America, the American states, is to be our unified voice in the international community. That is what Uncle Sam is. Now, in that international community, back in the early 20s, this word national came up. Now, before that time, Uncle Sam had been referring to, in the late 1800s, we had Alaska, we got Hawaii as a territory. We were beginning to go out and, we eventually got the Philippines and the Virgin Islands. Uncle Sam, in congressional legislation, people in those areas were described as persons. Well, they were subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, but they were persons owing a duty of obedience to the United States. Now, that phrase, it's a phrase. Well, that phrase that referred to citizens or people in the insular possessions got replaced starting in the 20s by this word national. And I've got over my website pages out of the United States statutes at large that explain all this. You can see it. Pull up, some pages from the 1800s, talking about how citizens in the territories and insular possessions or persons in the insular possessions were described. Persons owing a duty of obedience and allegiance to the United States. And then that gets replaced with nationals. Now, inherently, a national is a citizen in the insular possessions, and so these people that are running around making this argument, oh, I'm a national, would this be a good description of that, Shaun? They're jumping out of their frying pan into the fire.
Oh, there's no question about it. No question about it.
So I would implore our listeners, don't get involved with nationals. But then about the same time, we got these people making arguments about Brits. We're still Brits. I've seen that's popped up here on the internet. All of that is baseless. Now, I've got over on my website, I'm going to be talking about my website here because we're going to be using it as a foundation for a lot of the programs over the next month or two, maybe 3 months. I'm going to be talking about the information I got posted on my website. Now, I've got two websites. One is LarryBecraft.org. That's just a single page that tells you how to get in touch with me. Don't go there. Go to my Dixieland Law Journal. Now, back in the summer of 1997, I put up on my internet service provider a website. And I was just going to stick legal information up there so I could use that website on my internet service provider's, domain on its computers. I was going to use that as a basis for disseminating legal information. Well, over the years, that thing has grown, and it's basically poured in concrete on that website. So it's kind of difficult for me to pick it up and move. But, if you want to get to my website, it's called the Dixieland Law Journal. Now, two ways to find this unique URL where my website is located. Put in Becraft Briefs in an internet search engine or Dixieland Law Journal. Now, when you get over to the Dixieland Law Journal, the front page, there's the links to other pages. Now, that front page is simple. Hey, I built that website. And if you think I can produce a fancy website, you got another thing coming. Oh, I can put up HTML and I can write words. And it's nothing fancy, but that's where a lot of good legal information is posted over on the Dixieland Law Journal. Now, when you get to the Dixieland Law Journal, economics and money, that's an interest that's real important to me. Jurisdiction, that's an interest that's real important to me. Taxation, that's an interest that's real important to me. I have pages on my website devoted to that. Now, what we're going to be talking about over the course of the next several months are those parts of my website that are devoted to the topic of taxation. Now, when you're on the Dixieland Law Journal website, and you click on the page that's linked to the taxation page, that will carry you over to this other page where there's a lot of... I don't know of anybody that has put all this stuff together. There's no other website on the internet that's like this. Provides the old tax acts and the regulations. Now, years ago, back in the early 80s when I copied all of the old tax acts and regulations, sat down in front of the copying machine, you'd feed the copying machine with dimes, and I'd run off copies, and I put all the copies, thousands and thousands of pages, in 3-ring spiral-bound notebooks, and there were a whole bunch of 3-ring spiral-bound notebooks that contained a whole lot of tax information. And it would take up a bookshelf. Now, you don't need any of that. You can get it off of my website. Now, on my taxation page, when you get over there to the taxation page where there's links to other pages that deal with taxes, right up at the top, there's old tax acts and regulations. Now, years ago, about the time that I was running into and meeting Shaun back in the early 80s, I was also digging into the old tax acts and regulations. And I found, by looking at it from a historical perspective, I found that there were a lot of answers. There's a lot of things that people don't know that are only discoverable, they're only available by looking at the old stuff. So, about in the late 90s, I embarked on this project to create... I took the tax acts, scanned them, and converted them to text, and they're posted over my website. Hey, folks, I can hear in the background. It's 5:34 my time. The music's coming on, letting us know we got a commercial break. After this break, we'll be back for the final segment of today's show, and I want to tell you some real important information. So stay tuned. Shaun and I are here. Hey, welcome back to this afternoon's final 15-minute segment, or the final, or the last segment, however long it is. I think it's about 15 minutes. But, right before the break, I was talking about the stuff that I've got posted over on my website. Now, years ago, I sat down and, I didn't know we could be able to send huge files over the internet. So I converted the statutes at large, the tax acts, to text, and then made the reproduction of the statutes, the pages in the statutes at large where the old tax acts are found. I made it as close to the original as people look at what I produced and the originals, and a lot of them, people don't even know that, you're looking at something I created, just a text conversion of the statutes at large. But, nonetheless, you can find on the taxation page all of the old tax acts. Now, this is something that's real important. We're going to be getting into in these later shows over the next couple of months. There's a story to be told. Now, that story to be told about the old tax acts, that's something that, it's an interesting story. People haven't heard it. And once you hear this story about just the old tax act, it is something it is something that Congress did. It's something that the Treasury Department, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, and the IRS, they did. And people don't know anything about it, and so it's an interesting story. And the reason why, people need to know something about the old stuff is because I have found that people just looking at the current law are clueless about what the real issues are. That is something that that redeeming truth, I've learned that to be absolutely 100% correct. Too many people, especially in, the freedom movement, people that are interested in the tax issues, they're only looking at the 1986 Internal Revenue Code, which is incredibly complex. And they're trying to find their answers based on that. And they're trying to find their answers based on these volumes and volumes and volumes of regulations. It's complex. And there's a different story if you go back into the old days and look at how it was built. You're going back into a simpler time, and it's a whole lot easier to deal with. Hey, it's a whole lot easier to deal with an income tax that's only 50 pages long than something that's thousands of pages long. Wouldn't you agree? I think everybody can readily understand. It's something to, instead of having multiple, 15 or 20 volumes of regulations for the tax laws, it's something else, to only be dealing with a set of regulations that deal with that are only about 200 or 300 pages long. and then in the tax acts, we're only, you can throw out and not be concerned about, most of the tax laws are dealing with the benefits and deductions and credits under the Internal Revenue Code, and that's of no interest to most people unless, you're filing a return and you got some complicated matters. If you're only wanting to concern yourself, well, who is subject to this thing? That is a matter that can be readily understood, even though it flows through about 13 or 14 different tax acts. It's all understandable. This is something that we can explain during the course of this program. Now, not only, years ago did I say, reached the conclusion we needed to make available the original, the tax acts for people to study. I also reached the conclusion we needed the tax regulations. Now, a lot of people don't even know anything about the old tax regulations. Well, on this page of my website called the Old Tax Acts and Regulations, you can click on, like you can, if you want to read the 1913 Income Tax Act, boom, you can pull it up. If you want to read the 1918, the Revenue Act of 1918, boom, click on a link, it'll come up. You don't have to do what I used to do, hop in a car, and for me here in Alabama, in Huntsville, Alabama, in order to get the matters out of the statutes at large, I had to drive out to the university. And that's in the days before the Internet. Well, now that we got the Internet, And now that we got PDF scans, and, there's a lot of tons and tons and tons of legal information posted on the internet, virtually everything you need to know that's really relevant for who's encompassed within the federal income tax, hey, it's posted over on my website. Now, you can download the Revenue Act of 1918, and there's a set of regulations, Regulations 45, that the Commissioner of Internal Revenue and the Secretary of the Treasury drafted up to, here's something that people don't know anything about. These old regulations, why are they important? Because there's a pattern to them. There's a pattern to the old tax acts, and there's a pattern to the old regulations. And, if you're just looking at, who is brought within all this, you can weave through all the old tax acts and limit your field of study to, not just a couple sections. Same thing that relates to the regulations. Now, over my website, like the Regulations 45 for the Revenue Act of 1918, let me tell you what you're looking at when you're looking at the regulations. A lot of people don't understand that, when you have a large government agency that employs, today, hey, we've heard about, some of these public officials of late have been getting on, especially since we got Trump in office. They're talking about, hey, look, in my department, there are tens of thousands of people that were, I think the Secretary of State talks about how many people work under him. When you got hundreds of thousands of people involved in an agency, and of course the IRS claims that they got 100,000 people, and do you know, a city that has 100,000 people population, that is a big city. And the IRS could employ everybody in a big city. A city of 100,000 people here in America would probably be within the top 200 cities in population size. Woo! And that's just one agency. Now, when you have a whole lot, and this is the way it's been for a long time, when you have a whole lot of people that are working for an agency and they're charged with enforcing a complex law, you better come up with something that kind of explains it better in detail, and so that everybody inside the agency is at least on the same page, so to speak, when they're coming to enforcing this law. You can't have some employees coming up with one idea and somebody else coming up with another idea. No, there's got to be a uniform interpretation of the law that you're enforcing, and that's what the regulations are. That's the way it's been. This things about coming up with regulations in the late 1880s and 1890s. That's when the agency started really coming out with a lot of regulations, which were really nothing more than instructions to agency employees. And so by the time we get into the 19-teens and 1920s, these agencies are cranking out the regulations. The Bureau of Internal Revenue was cranking out regulations, and all of these regulations deal with, what the Bureau of Internal Revenue thought the law involved. And that includes who. As much as people don't want to talk about who, there's just a couple of sections that relate to who the individual is. It's subject to the Revenue Act of 1918, the Revenue Act of 1921, Revenue Act of 1924. Just a couple of sections in there. And then there's not a whole lot more when you go over the regulations. There's not a whole lot more that deal with that same issue, who. And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next some months. So what I'm going to do is I want to invite, here we're getting ready to come up on a good weekend. We've gotten through the fall. Saturdays in the fall are usually occupied with something else. We've also gotten past the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, and now we're into, we're getting into the middle of winter. And in the middle of winter, people can take their Saturdays and sit down and start taking a look at this stuff. Now, Shaun, I know I've been flapping my gums a little bit here and leaving you out. Do you think that's a good introduction? Do you think it's a benefit for our listeners to tune in regularly on a Friday afternoon and listen to this stuff as we kind of educate them, and then in their spare time go over and do what I'm talking about? And if they do that, then they'll walk away with a better understanding.
Well, unquestionably, because not only will they have the tools that you're giving them, the regulations and the codes themselves, which are very important historically, because, as I've said before, you can't understand where you are unless you understand how you got there, and that's what history is all about, and that's what the Internal Revenue Codes of the past are. Each one of them, as you said before, Larry, each one of them follow the last one and follow the last one and follow the last one. And when you go backwards, it becomes clear as day just exactly who the income tax applied to, who it was intended to apply to, and how things haven't changed regardless of the voluminous amount of regulations and new sections of the code that they have placed in there. Additionally, these regulations that Larry is talking about, folks, are very, very important, because anytime you look at a tax section or statute, invariably, Congress leaves it up to the administrative agency, in other words, the IRS in this case, to create regulations to explain what the statute requires. And the courts give those regulations a tremendous amount of weight and almost complete deference as to what those regulations mean and how important they are. So in order to understand just exactly what these sections are, the regulations are created to explain it to you clearly. And when you start reading these regulations, you start scratching your head saying, well, wait a minute. That doesn't exactly look like what's happening. And you know what? You'd be right. And that's one of the advantages of these shows, because as we talk about regulations and statutes, we're not only going to go through many of them, but as we go through them and we parse out the language that's in there, which is not hard to do, it becomes crystal clear just exactly what the government, in other words, Congress and the IRS and the commissioner and all these people write the regulations are talking about, and it's really an eye-opening event.
Yeah. Now, hey, Shaun, we're almost into the program. How do our listeners find you here in America, a big place?
Well, you just go to whatever browser you're using and type in Shaun, S-H-A-W-N, O'Connor, O-C-O-N-N-O-R. Do not use an apostrophe. ShaunO'Connor.org. It'll take you right to my website, and there's a lot of information on there about myself and Free Enterprise Society Services and various and a lot of other information also. So that's the easiest way to do it, ShaunO'Connor.org.
And we're going to be over the next. Would you agree? Is this kind of a good objective to have here? The first Friday in January of 2020, and we got April the 15th of 2020 coming up. Would you agree that this is a good topic to be talking about on these Friday afternoons as well as Wednesday evenings?
Oh, I think it's real important, because as this so-called tax filing date comes forward, folks, you ought to know just exactly what you're paying for, number one, but even more important than that is, why are you doing this? Does the law actually apply to you? Does this law really require you to be doing something? Or
Shaun, I'm going to have to interrupt you right now because the music's coming on, letting us know the end of the program's arrived. Folks, we'll be back next week. Stay tuned.
Bye-bye.
See you then.